South Africa's job market ended 2024 on a, let's call it, slightly more positive note then, with 132,000 new jobs added in the final 3 months of the year, bringing total employment to 17.1 million. That also helped nudge the unemployment rate down to 31.9 from around 32.1 in the previous 3 months. But despite those gains in the second half of the year, earlier job losses weighed on overall progress, so the year-on-year figure wasn't too good. What will it take, though, to drive sustainable job creation in South Africa, particularly as we anticipate the unemployment data for the first quarter of this year to be released a little bit later on this morning? Let's bring in Siyabulela Mama from the Assembly of the Unemployed ahead of that release. Then, Siyabulela, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. Do you foresee any glimmer of hope then, particularly in the stats to be released later today?
Well, I mean, as we've seen in the South African context in itself, that quarter one usually brings a certain increase in the rate of unemployment as compared to the previous year, quarter four. And as the example that you brought about in terms of how quarter four of 2023 was about 32.1%, we've seen in quarter one actually of 2024 there was this increase in 32.9%, and this points out to the problematic nature of the job market and the problematic nature of employment in South Africa, at that it's casual, it's precarious, because as you've seen that during quarter four and as the quarter that we're entering into now, we're starting to see the rise in seasonal work. Now in January up to March, there's usually in decline in terms of that, so contracts tend to end, and this is why we always make the point around we need to invest in permanent employment and the driving of reindustrialization as well.
So what is, I mean, we've spoken about entrepreneurship being a key part of growing this economy as well, but to do that, you kind of have to build the kind of infrastructure and development phase then of encouraging people to start businesses, aiding them with funding from grassroots, etc. If we're unable to create that kind of platform for entrepreneurs, imagine the difficulty of trying to create the kind of platform that grows jobs as well. Have we advanced this notion of entrepreneurship sufficiently, do you think?
And so I'd like us to think about a different point, because we need to understand the crisis that we face, the crisis of unemployment that we face, and where does it stem from, right? It stems from the shift in the pattern of investment post 1994 in terms of investment moving into the financial sector. Okay, so now what we actually need, and of course then that resulting in deindustrialization. So what we actually need to be thinking about in terms of the crisis that we face and the precarity of work that comes to it, is to think about reindustrialization and how the state with its infrastructure could invest in this reindustrialization as a long-term issue, as to fight the crisis of unemployment. And of course, with climate change that is rising now, how do we think about a reindustrialized low-carbon economy that speaks about permanent employment?
Should we then stop investing in the NDP, the National Development Plan as we know it? Because that suggests that we should have employment down to 6% by 2030. At current trajectory, we're not getting there.
Yeah, exactly. And this is also what also need to think about. I mean, there's been this debate around that as well, and how does that would affect the poor. But then there's a certain aspect as well into it, that there's more resource, money, where this could be funded to get to where we want in terms of reindustrialization and investing in productive sectors that would boom the economy. For example, the introduction of progressive wealth tax, the increase in corporate tax, as we've seen in the 1940s, where the corporate tax was actually in a high note. And we face a serious crisis of illicit financial flows, profit shifting, and
Sure.
those monies could be redirected in funding this reindustrialization that we actually talk about. And this is possible, not to mention the money in the PIC that GPEF that's invested into the JSE in the financial sector, and that money could be redirected into productive industries to bring about this reindustrialization that we're talking about.
Siyabulela, just as a final question, can we fix all of this without fixing youth employment as a start? Because youth unemployment is 44.6%. If we don't get that right, the future of the country then ultimately is also on a downward trajectory.
Absolutely. So I think the crisis that we face, and if we don't look at that thing as a priority, I think we face as a country a serious booming crisis in many ways. We're already currently seeing this serious decline in social fabric, what's happening in our townships in terms of crime. So and as we think about these processes, we need to think about how do we address the crisis of youth unemployment. And by doing that, we need to invest in the skills that already exist with young people. I mean, how do we fight about the crisis of graduate unemployment and the experience that people have, and those people have been retrenched? So how do we bring about those skills into productive systems?
Siyabulela, appreciate the time. Thank you so much. It's going to be an interesting one because this is a continued issue that we face in the country.